100 episodes. That number means something to me because behind every episode, every conversation, every lesson, every reflection, there has been growth as a professional, as a leader, as a communicator, and as a person trying to understand people, organizations, pressure, resilience, and purpose in a much deeper way. And if there's one thing I've learned after years of working in leadership spaces, HR systems, organizational environments, and professional development conversations, is this: people are often evaluated long before they are fully understood. Sometimes before they even speak. A school name, a company logo, a title, a credential, a network, a social connection, and instantly assumptions begin to form. Some people walk into rooms already validated. Others walk into rooms already underestimated. And the interesting thing is, many organizations say they value competence, innovation, and diversity of thought, but unconsciously, they often reward familiarity, prestige, and perceived safety. So for episode 100, I wanted to have a deeper conversation. Not a controversial conversation, not an emotional rant, not a conversation rooted in resentment, but a mature conversation about professional perception, about prestige, about bias, credibility, organizational psychology, and about what happens when perception quietly becomes more influential than demonstrated capability. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, prestige bias exists in the workplace, and understanding it matters for leaders, hiring professionals, educators, and professionals trying to navigate their careers with integrity.
You're listening to the Off Balance Podcast, where faith, family, and business collide. Hosted by Brooks Deming, Doctor of Business Administration, business coach, and resilience expert. Each episode features real-life conversations to help entrepreneurs like you build resilience and lead with confidence.
Welcome back to Off Balance. I'm your host, Dr. Brooks. And to everyone who has listened to this podcast, supported this platform, shared episodes, engaged in conversations, or simply allowed these discussions to become a part of your professional journey, thank you. Reaching 100 episodes is so meaningful because this platform was never built to simply talk. It was built to think, to challenge ideas, to examine systems, to explore leadership honestly, to discuss the realities people experience inside organizations that often go unspoken. And today's topic is one of those conversations. We are discussing prestige bias, professional credibility, institutional signaling, and how organizations sometimes confuse perception with capability. And I want to approach this discussion carefully and professionally. This is not an anti education conversation. This is not an attack on prestigious universities or high performing institutions. Many institutions provide incredible opportunities, strong education, and valuable professional networks. That's absolutely true. But as someone who has worked within professional systems and observed workplace dynamics for years, I have also seen how organization perception can shape opportunity in ways people do not always openly discuss. So today I want us to examine that reality. One of the most fascinating things about organizational behavior is how quickly people form conclusions. Before you present an idea, before you demonstrate competence, before you solve a problem, the room is already assessing you. And sometimes those assessments have very little to do with your capability. People respond to signals. That's human nature. Institutional names become signals. Corporate brands become signals. Titles become signals. Social status, signals. And because organizations move quickly, many professionals unconsciously rely on those signals as shortcuts for evaluation. In psychology, we often see this connected to something called the halo effect. The halo effect happens when one positive characteristic causes people to assume additional positive characteristics. For example, Someone attends a highly respected university, and suddenly people may unconsciously assume they're intelligent, they're disciplined, they have leadership potential, they are competent and credible before the person has demonstrated any of those qualities. Now, to be fair, prestigious institutions often produce exceptional professionals, but prestige itself is not competence. And I think organizations sometimes struggle to separate the two. The reason this conversation matters is because workplace perception affects real outcome. It affects hiring, promotions, leadership visibility, mentorship opportunities, salary negotiations, and whose voices receive credibility in the room. And from an HR perspective, I understand why organizations lean into prestige. Hiring is expensive. Bad leadership decisions are expensive, turnovers expensive. Organizations are constantly trying to reduce uncertainty. So institutional reputation becomes a form of risk management. The thinking becomes if the person succeeded there, they must already be validated. And again, sometimes that assumption works. But sometimes organizations become so focused on institutional pedigree that they overlook operational excellence, emotional intelligence, adaptability, communication, resilience, and real world leadership experience. Because leadership is not theoretical once pressure arrives. Leadership becomes visible during conflict, uncertainty, organizational instability, burnout, deadlines, difficult conversations, and decision making under pressure. And many of those skills are developed through lived experiences, not just academic association. I think one of the greatest risks of prestige heavy organizational cultures is that they sometimes overlook professionals who develop differently. Not everyone followed the same path. Some people work while earning degrees, balance families and education, changed careers later in life, served in the military, learned through operational experience, or developed expertise outside elite institutional pipelines. And sometimes those professionals become exceptional leaders because their development required resilience, adaptability, emotional regulation, persistence, and problem solving. Organizations sometimes underestimate the value of lived complexity. A polished resume can impress a room, but operational wisdom sustains organizations. The person who understands people, systems, communication, morale, accountability, and execution often becomes more valuable long term than the person who simply carried the strongest institutional brand. And I think many organizations are still learning that lesson. Now, this is where the conversation becomes especially important for leaders because prestige can quietly become a substitute for discernment. And discernment matters in leadership. Strong leaders learn how to evaluate thinking, judgment, adaptability, communication, and integrity, not just branding. Because titles can mislead, credentials can mislead, confidence can mislead, even charisma can mislead. That creates dangerous blind spots, especially in leadership pipelines. Because leadership is not proven by who impressed people during interviews. Leadership is revealed over time. It reveals itself in consistency, humility, accountability, emotional maturity, decision making, and how someone handles pressure when outcomes matter. Now, I want to speak directly to professionals who may have experienced moments where they felt underestimated, maybe because of where you came from, where you studied, your accent, your background, your age, your personality, your industry, or the pathway you took to build your career. Here's what I want you to remember. Do not allow external perception to stop internal development. Continue building, continue learning, continue to refine your communication, continue developing your expertise. Continue strengthening your ability to lead, think critically, solve problems, and create value because eventually substance becomes difficult to ignore. And one of the most powerful things a professional can do is build a body of work so strong that people are forced to reevaluate their assumptions, not through arrogance, not through bitterness, not through constantly trying to prove your worth, but through consistency. Healthy organizations eventually learn how to look deeper. They learn how to identify capability, emotional intelligence, teachability, systems thinking, and leadership sustainability. One thing about healthy organizations, they understand that great teams are rarely built through sameness alone. They recognize the value of diverse experience, non traditional pathways, operational thinkers, practical communicators, and professionals who understand both theory and execution. Because organizations don't survive on branding alone, they survive on people who can solve problems, stabilize systems, lead teams, communicate clearly, and sustain performance under pressure. And often those professionals are more nuanced than a resume can fully capture. As I close episode 100, I think this conversation is about something much bigger than education or prestige. I think it's really about how we evaluate human potential, how quickly we form conclusions, how often we rely on shortcuts, and how easily perception shapes opportunity. And I think strong leadership requires us to become more thoughtful evaluators of people, not abandoning standards. I'm not talking about abandoning excellence or rigor, but recognizing that human capability is often more layered than institutional labels alone. Prestige may influence introductions, but sustained excellence is what shapes a legacy. And eventually, your work, your consistency, your professionalism, your integrity, your leadership, and your impact begin speaking louder than assumptions. So, to everyone who has supported Off Balance through 100 episodes, thank you for growing with me.
Thanks for listening. Please rate this episode and share it with your family and friends. To learn more about your host or to book a coaching session, visit www.brooksdeming.com. Until next time, rise.